Without doubt, in my personal opinion, the original Game Boy was probably one of the best games consoles of all time. It revolutionized the way we play games on the go. And even to this day, people are still pimping out the Game Boy and adding backlit displays just so they can play their original cartridges. And with the Game Boy came a ton of really good games. But what are the best Game Boy games of all time? And in our opinion, we thought we'd make a video and share with you just that. So let's jump straight in with the best Game Boy games of all time, and it's only Game Boy games, not color or advanced, just the OG Game Boy. So coming in at number 10 is Final Fantasy Adventure. We've all heard of Final Fantasy, a huge franchise that's still going to this day, but one of the greatest was on the Game Boy. It was released in 1993 by developer Square and was aimed at those that wanted a different and more mature adventure game compared to the likes of Zelda and Pokemon. The world is viewed from a top-down camera angle and you can defeat monsters, explore the world and discover its detailed story. But what made Final Fantasy Adventure incredible was its choice of unique illustration and the introduction to mana and stamina. This made the game much more challenging and one that you'd have to think about what you were doing instead of just picking it up and playing. It's a game for an older audience who want a challenge and a new style of action games for the original Game Boy. Now coming in at number 9, one that many of you will absolutely love because the character is without a doubt one of the cutest that Nintendo's ever created, and that is Kirby's Dreamland. Kirby, the floating, chubby ball of love that likes to suck its enemies into its abyss. Sounds a bit scary, but this adorable thing was loved by millions. Kirby's Dreamland was released in 1992 by Nintendo and is an action platformer which was made for pick-up-and-play gamers. But not just that, the developers wanted it to be a game for the more hardcore platformers out there and allowed you to unlock new, harder levels and lower Kirby's HP. Kirby can fly by inflating himself with a mouthful of air and flapping his arms. Flying can be done indefinitely, however, while flying, Kirby's only method of attack is to release the air puff held in his mouth, which cancels his flight. This is how you navigate across the 5 levels in order to complete the game. It's a cute, challenging platformer with a different touch to Mario and others in its category. Now coming in at number 8, one of the most popular names to come out of Nintendo, and that's Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong, one of the most nostalgic games characters of all time and renowned for being a challenging arcade game which soon got ported to the Game Boy. It was released on the Game Boy in 1994 and allowed Game Boy fans to tackle the ever so challenging puzzle games in pocket form. The player would take control of Mario, whose aim was to rescue Pauline from Mr. Big Bad Donkey Kong. He'd throw barrels at you, making it hard to navigate up the level. You were greeted with different levels, different difficulties, and the ever so nostalgic theme tune. It's a great game and a great character that everyone loves to hate. It was by far one of the finest, most addictive pick-up-and-play games for the Game Boy. Now coming in at number 7, not necessarily a game, but I think it's really worth pointing out here, and that is the Game Boy Camera.
There's a rumor laughter's on its way. Smile, you're on Game Boy Camera.
It's not so much a game, but more of a must-have accessory, but it's still going on our list. The Game Boy Camera allowed the 90s kids to take selfies. Super pixelated selfies that made you look like Smeagol. You added it to your cartridge slot and voila, you could add filters, take pictures, save pictures, and turn your Game Boy into a fine portable snapping device that made kids get out of the house. Team this thing up with the Game Boy printer and you could quite literally print your selfies out on the go. You just have to remember though to bring a crate full of AA batteries because this thing goes through them quick. This was the cool kids gadget and one not every child could get hold of because this thing was dang expensive. Now coming up next on our list, one of the finest games and one that a lot of you have probably played, and that's Super Mario Land 2. That's right, not Super Mario Land 1, but Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins. This was the platformer that brought more depth to the graphics. We're not talking about extra pixels here, we're talking about a simple addition to depth of field and shading that allowed the users to be slightly more immersed. This led on to Super Mario Land 2 being a serious enjoyment to play, forever keeping you on your feet and trying to explore every section of every level. It even introduced Luigi, Mario's best bud, who is still in the latest Nintendo games to this date. It was released in 1992 by Nintendo, a very early game that kept other developers on their feet. It pleased Mario fans and pleased those who wanted a challenge, and therefore it's an all-rounder and one we couldn't not feature on our best Game Boy games list. Now coming up next, another well-known game, and that is Metroid 2. Metroid was released on the Game Boy in 1991 and was the first ever Metroid game to be pushed to a handheld device. You played as bounty hunter Samus, and her mission was to kill every Metroid creature on their home planet before space pirates could steal them. There's lots of exploring, lots of dodging, and lots of button bashing in order to stay alive. It was published by Nintendo themselves, so the gameplay was obviously top notch. Once you killed all of the creatures on each level, an earthquake would happen, lowering lava levels and allowing you to obtain new weapons and kill even more creatures. It was a great shoot 'em up side-scroller with some seriously cool levels. Now coming in at number 4, a game which almost every Game Boy customer had, and that was Tetris. The game 99% of Game Boy users had, not because it's the best Game Boy game of all time, but because it came free with most purchases. And although it was seriously overlooked by children back in the day, it was the game that got adults and teenagers into the handheld community. Its ever-growing challenge of getting the high score and its addictive theme tune made it one of the most playable pick-up-and-play games for the Game Boy original. And still, to this day, Tetris is forever evolving, and just due to its easy playability and mind-numbingly enjoyable gameplay, it had to be one we added to the list because it's just hard to hate Tetris, especially when it's so addictive. It's that game that you could go to any country and almost any age and they'll be like, yeah, I know what Tetris is. It's a renowned game and one of the most popular games probably ever. Now coming in at number 3, one you definitely didn't think was going to be on this list because it's a personal favourite of mine, and that's Turok. One that may surprise you being on our best Game Boy games list, and that's Turok Battle of the Bionosaurs. Whatever it's called, that. A 2D action platformer developed by Bit Managers for the Game Boy in 1997. It was a challenging game and one of the first to feature dinosaurs, which, well, everyone loved back then. It had a number of stages, but the game was renowned for switching between being a side-scroller and a bird's-eye view game, which made each stage feel completely different and unique. The dinos were scary, the weapon choices vast, and tactical button mashing strategies were needed in order to get to the end. It was released alongside Turok Dinosaur Hunter on the N64, and many Turok fans came over from that console in order to play it on the go. It was one badass game that we still play to this day, and it's good to see that the Turok franchise is still going strong with modern titles. We just absolutely love dinosaurs. Now, this is where it gets a little tight on our list, and people might get angry for this one, but coming in at number 2 is The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is probably the best Game Boy game on the entire planet, and that's for good reason. This game was the action-adventure game that sapped the attention of Game Boy fans for hours on end. It was a game developed by Nintendo for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color and was released in 1993, making it one of the first big games for the Nintendo Game Boy. It didn't kickstart the Zelda franchise, but boy did it help. It starts with Link being stranded on an island, having to discover a way off, solving complex puzzles and fighting off monsters, all while finding 8 musical instruments that will awaken the sleeping fish that stops him from leaving. The game sold over 6 million units. That's insane. That, alongside an incredible story, is why it's on our best Game Boy games list at number 2. And if you don't have a Game Boy, you can even get this on the Nintendo Switch now because it's been remade for that console. So, coming in at number 1, and one you have definitely heard of still to this day, it's one of the most popular gaming franchises of all time, and that is Pokemon Red and Blue. We couldn't have a top 10 best Game Boy games list without featuring Pokemon, the RPG that changed many kids and adults' lives. Pokemon Red and Blue was released in 1996 in Japan and 98 in Western countries by developers Game Freak. It was mainly used on the Game Boy Color, which came with a shade of red or green within the game. It's not a lot of colour, but hey, it was an upgrade from the original Game Boy. The game was one hell of an adventure, and the aim was to catch every single Pokemon and become the best Pokemon Master in the world. But defeating the Elite Four, a team of highly trained Pokemon Masters with some of the strongest Pokemon around, was the biggest challenge. It was no pick up and play game. You'd put hours and hours into the story just to get through the gyms, and even then, that can be challenging if you didn't plan what Pokemon to use. Tactics would be needed and trades would be used in order to strengthen your team. It was the game that connected Game Boy players from around the world, all with the simple use of a trade cable. And still to this day, people are trying to buy the sealed Pokemon games and they're going for about £300. Even boxed, they're quite expensive as well, and even the cartridges alone go for around about £10 to £20, which is pretty ridiculous seeing as they sold stupid amounts of this thing. And if you can't get hold of the Game Boy game, you might as well just pick it up on the Nintendo Switch anyway, because that thing is a whopping game as well. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let us know in the comment section below which game you think should have been featured but wasn't, and let us know what console you want us to do next in terms of top 10 games. Do you want the Game Boy Advance? Do you want the PSP, the N64? Let us know and we'll do it for you. As per usual, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.